Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Legendary Aspects. Today we're going to be going over a very simple legendary aspect, and this is the aspect of Disobedience. The aspect of Disobedience offers a pretty nice bonus of 0.6 to 1.1% increased armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage, stacking up to 66% times total. Now, the aspect of Disobedience is one that you can obtain relatively easily through gambling. It is used a lot by a lot of people, but I am not exactly sure why. And I'll explain myself later. But if you want to get your hands on an aspect of Disobedience, it is the easiest to gamble on a Necromancer's from the Pants slot. It is usable in Helmet, Chest Armor, Pants, Shield, and Amulet slots, which means that you can put it into an Amulet slot and increase its effectiveness by 50% if you'd like to. Although normally people don't use their Amulet slot for defensive aspects. Mainly because it's a very powerful offensive slot as well. And when you're choosing between offense and defense, it's, you know, here or there. Now, what exactly does the aspect of Disobedience do? Well, it gives you a rather large amount of armor when you attack a target. Now, unlike the aspect of Might, which we'll be covering later, which literally works whether you hit a monster or not. As you can see here, I can literally swing the air, and I can get the effect. The aspect of Disobedience does not work by swinging the air, which means that it does not actually activate unless you are in combat actively hitting something. Another big downside to the aspect of Disobedience is that each one of the stacks is independent of all of the other stacks. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, whenever I activate the aspect of Might, as an example, and I activate the aspect of Might again, the cooldown is simply refreshed. So every single time I activate the effect, it just refreshes the effect, and it stays up constantly. The aspect of Disobedience does not work this way. The aspect of Disobedience gives you stacks, and the stacks fall off at the exact time that they are supposed to, and do not refresh any other stacks in the rotation. So if I attack a monster one time and generate 2 stacks, I now have 2 stacks that will fall off exactly at the same time because they were both generated at the same time. If I stack 1 stack now and then a couple more stacks later, you will see that one of the stacks will fall off together, and then all of the stacks will fall off together again. A good example of this is if I were to use the multiple training dummies, and I use my Poison Creeper, which is a good example. So I'm just going to right-click my Poison Creeper in the middle, and I'm going to generate multiple stacks all at once. As you can see, they start to fall off all together at the same time as well in large clumps. This is, unfortunately, and in my opinion, a very negative thing about the way that the Disobedience aspect works. Number 1, it's not active before you go into combat. Number 2, it doesn't always stay at its full effectiveness unless you are constantly and never-endingly attacking targets, which means that to obtain the full bonus, you basically have to continually attack without end. So at any time you were to stop, let's say, for instance, a boss were to lock me into a crowd control effect for 3 seconds. 1 1000, 2 1000. 3 1000, and then I try to resume attacking. My armor starts to fall off at that last second when I come out of the crowd control effect. The problem with this is that because it's not always active 100% of the time, the armor that it gives you, although it is quite nice, as you can see I go up to 8,977, is not quite as effective in my opinion as some other aspects. I'm comparing this to the Might aspect because I feel like if you have to choose between the Might aspect and the Disobedience aspect, you are best off choosing the Might aspect, and I'll explain my reasoning. First off, ever since the armor has been removed from the non-physical damage, this means that the armor is no longer going to protect you from elemental attacks. So there are currently 6 different damage types within the game. Fire, lightning, cold, poison, shadow, and of course, physical. Physical is governed by your armor. In any event that you are increasing your damage reduction stats, increasing your armor is only ever going to increase 1 damage reduction type, your physical damage reduction. Whereas adding something like the aspect of Might is going to increase all of your damage reduction, including your fire, lightning, cold, poison, physical, and shadow, right? So in this particular situation, if I were to have to choose between the aspect of disobedience and the aspect of might, I would choose the aspect of might. And the reason for this is because, number one, I can cast the aspect of might before I enter combat, which means that I have the damage reduction upon entering combat, as opposed to getting the damage reduction after entering combat. The aspect of disobedience basically precludes the idea of making yourself tanky before the combat begins. Now, the thing is, though, is that if you are a highly AoE damage character or you attack extraordinarily fast, you can potentially build your 60 stacks within a matter of seconds. As you can see, I managed to build all 60 stacks within, what, like 2 or 3 seconds? However, sometimes at the very beginning of combat, it can be the most deadly for your character, and not having those stacks at the beginning of the combat can be unfortunate. This also means that because disobedience requires you to actually hit something, you will often find that it is most ineffective versus the very monsters that you would want to protect yourself against. For instance, corpse pose. Corpse pose is a very good example. Corpse foes often sit off of screen. They are often not within range. You are not attacking them. Very often you walk into a room and the first thing that happens is you are hit by a corpse bow. The corpse bow is a physical damage attacker, and he will hit you from a vast distance before you can generate any of this damage reduction. And of course, without your many stacks of disobedience to increase your armor to a high enough level so that you are getting the damage reduction that you need, well, you are now in a disadvantage versus the corpse bow, which will most likely one-shot you. It's very common. This is the reason why disobedience is not anywhere near as effective as a lot of people think that it is. On top of this, there are other problems with stacking armor. So, in the many months since Diablo 4's launch, we have spent a long time trying to figure out how armor works, why it works the way that it does, and so forth and so on. Well, basically, what has been determined is that there is a penalty for fighting monsters that are higher level than yourself. The penalty, however, is not applied to you. The penalty is actually a penetration that the monster obtains when attacking you directly. So if a monster attacks you that is, say, like level 154, they apply a nearly 5,000 armor penalty directly to your character. Now, this means, and rather unfortunately, that if you are not higher than the armor value that they are subtracting, then you get absolutely no benefit from adding armor to your character. And let me give you an example of this. So let's say, for instance, that your character has 5,000 armor, and the penalty that they're applying is 6,000. Okay? If they're applying a 6,000 armor penalty, then you are negative 1,000 in the hole. And this means that even if you add an additional 500 armor, you are going to get 0 benefit because you are still below the threshold. So you're still negative 500 under the threshold before you can start adding anything that will potentially benefit your character. The aspect of disobedience will help bring your armor up, but it is important to note that if your armor is extremely low, it's not going to help you at all. And that's rather unfortunate. So how much armor do you need to hit the 85% cap, which is the maximum amount of damage reduction that you can get for armor? That is actually 13,201. That is actually the value that you need. This is the value that you need to completely eradicate the penalty that is applied to you by the level 154 monster in a tier 100 dungeon. And this also, in turn, gets you to that 85% cap while canceling out the penalty. So if you were trying to get your physical damage reduction to 85%, you're going to need about 13,201 defense. Now, what characters can do this easily? The Barbarian can do it extremely easily. And the reason why the Barbarian has such an easy time is because, well, the Barbarian gets a large amount of their armor from strength. And on top of that, if you're utilizing some very nice high-tier pieces, each one of those high-tier pieces is going to have a pretty decent amount of armor on it as well. The Barbarian is actually capable of hitting that 13,201 without Disobedience, which is the preferable way to do it, because then you're not relying on the Disobedience to protect you. Because, like I said, when there are monsters that are going to attack you while these stacks are down, you are going to be in danger. This is another reason why I feel that the Aspect of Might is the superior option, because the Aspect of Might, like I said, can always be active. All you have to do is tap the button as you're walking around the dungeon. Number two, it also protects you against more than just physical damage. It protects you against the elemental damage as well. And you have to ask yourself, how often are you really hit by physical damage versus elemental damage? Most of the time when I die in dungeons, it's from fire explosions, lightning spires, freezing effects, poison damage on the ground, shadow puddles. I mean, you name it. There are tons and tons of effects in the game that can definitely cause lots and lots of damage, and there are also lots of them that are not physical damage. So it really comes down to how you set your character up, what you're trying to achieve, and also another very important thing is how often do you attack. If you only attack once in a while, Disobedience is a very bad aspect for you. If you're a very slow attacker, you can only generate a certain number of stacks per attack, and if you can't actually max out the stacks, then that's unfortunate. As you can clearly see, I can generate stacks by using damage over time effects. So if I use my poison, you can see I'm generating stacks just simply from the poison proccing on the target, which means that if you are a character who uses damage over time effects, shadow damage, poison damage, bleeding effects on the Barbarian, and so forth and so on, it can be extremely easy to activate the Disobedience armor aspect by just simply popping a damage over time effect upon everything around you, which is a pretty easy way to do it. All in all, the Aspect of Disobedience is definitely one that has come down in the ranks since before. So in the previous versions of the game, before resistances were fixed, armor used to be tied to resistances, and this made armor the king, and this also made Disobedience the king. It was literally one of the best aspects in the game prior to the fixing of the resistances. It still is a very good aspect, but it's nowhere near as good as it used to be before they fixed resistances. And now that the Aspect of Might protects you against all of those elements, and the Aspect of Disobedience does not, the Aspect of Might comes in a little bit higher now, in my opinion. Especially considering, like I said, you can keep it active all the time, and you also protect yourself from more than just physical damage. Keep in mind with armor that if you are incapable of stacking armor to a high degree, it is actually not preferable to stack armor at all. I know it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but basically if you're capable of stacking armor to 13,201, for instance, then do it. But if you have to struggle to get there, if you have to really fight to get up to that number, like on sorceresses, for instance, or on, say, a necromancer, it might be preferable to you to focus on damage reduction as opposed to armor value. Obviously, with armor, you have lots of it coming from your equipment anyway. So as you put on each piece of equipment, and you're going to get a decent amount of armor from your gear at the very least. So it's not like you're going to completely neglect your armor. You're still going to get armor from various sources. You're going to try and get as much as you can from your equipment. You may also pick up some armor nodes on the Paragon board and things like that. But it might not necessarily be the aspect that you're going to specifically go for your character. I think that's pretty much it when it comes to the Aspect of Disobedience. Let me know how you feel about the Aspect of Disobedience. Do you prefer the Aspect of Disobedience over the Aspect of Might? Or do you prefer the Aspect of Might over the Aspect of Disobedience? Or maybe you're using a class-specific damage reduction instead. There's a lot of really good class-specific damage reductions, which may actually do better than the Aspect of Disobedience or the Aspect of Might. For instance, there's one in particular for the Sorceress, which I specifically really like using. It's called the Glacial, or I think it's like Snow something aspect. I can't remember. Of course, I don't have it on me right now. I think it's called the Snow Guards aspect, and it's 25. There it is, right there. Snow Guards aspect, 25% damage reduction while standing in your own blizzard, and for 3 seconds after leaving it, which is actually really effective. It's it's very, very nice. It's more than the 20% that you gain from the might aspect, and it also stays active pretty much all the time as long as you are in contact with one of your blizzards at any given moment. And there is even an enchantment which allows you to basically have your blizzard spamming on you all the time, which has about 100% uptime. You can also cast the blizzard before you enter a room so that you walk through the blizzard as you enter the room, gaining the damage reduction at least for 3 seconds, or even longer if you stand in it. And you can do this in a way which is very beneficial to your character. There's tons of different ways to increase your damage reduction. This is a very nice one here, which is Veer's Mastery, which is a 9% damage reduction from close, and so forth and so on. It's not always limited to just these two options, I guess is what I'm saying. But these are definitely the two that are accessible to all characters. And then from there, you can take each individual character's requirements into consideration. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we're just talking about the aspect of disobedience. And as always, keep watching.